The aid game today. SUVs, fancy websites, and a privatization pop song. You are here on the map. Phantom aid, the dirty secret that makes giving so much easier. Tonight we ask questions about the questionable items donor countries count as foreign aid. Canada's Minister of International Cooperation joins us for her version of the accounts, and we'll show you what $500 million a year doesn't buy in an exclusive documentary report on aid to Haiti. Hello, I'm Avi Lewis. Welcome to On the Map. Last week in Germany, G8 leaders were at it again, making big promises of aid. This time out, they pledged $60 billion to fight disease in Africa, though no timetable, of course. But in all the talk of aid promises, debt relief, and the famous 0.7% of GDP, here's another angle that, for me, turns the entire issue upside down. According to a recent report from UK-based ActionAID, only half of foreign aid gets anywhere near its intended goal of reducing poverty. The rest is what's called phantom aid. In a couple of minutes, we'll speak with one of the authors of the report to get a fuller explanation of this paradigm-busting point of view. But first, a few choice examples. Bags of wheat stamped with the maple leaf passed from hand to hand. It's almost a cliche of our image as international do-gooders. But in the famine in Niger 3 years ago, 90% of the food aid given by Canada had to be spent on Canadian food. Great for our farmers dumping surplus wheat, bad for the people waiting for it to arrive by ship. Under pressure, the government changed its policy. Now up to 50% of food aid can be spent in poorer countries. Here's another one. A few years back, the Brits hired Adam Smith International, a right-wing think tank, to tell the government of Tanzania how to privatize its public water system. Aid money going directly to consultants never left the country. £500,000 and 2 years later, about all that was left was this. A pop video. Producer, Adam Smith International. By the way, the privatization was a complete disaster. The Tanzanian government reversed it, and the British government claimed all that money as development assistance. Last example. 2% of all foreign aid is spent on programs to help refugees settle in rich countries.
Wave after wave of immigrants fleeing oppression, persecution, and tyranny have found sanctuary, freedom, and justice in the true north, strong and free.
A worthy cause and well-spent money. But come on, is that really aid? Well, joining me now is one of the people who has helped bring the phantom aid phenomenon to light. Romilly Greenhill is with ActionAID in London. Welcome to On the Map.
Thank you.
Okay, let's start with a definition. Define phantom aid for me. Give me its components.
Well, when we talk about aid, when citizens in Canada and other countries talk about aid, they think that's money going to help put children in school, to provide essential drugs to hospitals. And what our research shows is that actually a lot of so-called aid money isn't actually directly targeted to poverty reduction. And that aid is what we call phantom aid.
So what are you talking about here?
We're talking about money that gets spent on overpriced and ineffective consultants, for example, from the donor country. We're talking about money that's tied to goods and services from the donor country. We're talking about money that never actually leaves the donor because it's spent on refugees in the donor country. So there's a whole range of areas that are officially called aid, but that aren't really going to help those most in need.
Now, your numbers suggest that something like, am I right, something like 40% of aid is phantom aid?
In Canada, it's about 40%. Globally, it's about 50% of all aid is what we call phantom aid.
Let's talk a little bit about debt relief. Debt relief is a huge part of what you're counting as phantom aid. What's the case for that?
Well, there's two big issues with debt relief. Firstly, the figures that are quoted vastly exaggerate the amount of money that's actually going to these countries. A country like Iraq, very topical country, it had some debt cancellation over the last couple of years, but that's actually not resulted in new money that's going to Iraq. So we're saying that really shouldn't be recorded as aid. The other big issue is that we think debt cancellation should be additional to aid. We think that Debt cancellation needs to happen because of past bad lending from the donor country. So we're really saying, let's have aid and as well as debt cancellation. Let's not count debt cancellation as part of the aid budget.
Let's talk about tide aid. In Canada, it's acknowledged now by the government to be a problem, but it's a long-standing tradition. What is the case against seeing aid as a sort of economic opportunity for the donor country? Because that really has been the case for many, many years.
Well, there's really two big problems with tide aid. Firstly, it's a value for money question. You know, if you're using contractors from, say, Canada, they're generally much, much more expensive than the contractors available locally in country. So that's the first issue. And, you know, if you really want your aid to be as effective as possible in the fight against poverty, you really need to untie aid. But the second issue is that it's a really missed opportunity in those countries. You know, if builders, if constructing firms in, say, Ghana, in Tanzania, can actually win contracts from the aid budgets, they can then grow, they can generate jobs and employment, they can have a much bigger impact on development. And it's also much more sustainable because then they are there on hand if something goes wrong with the building, the school that they've constructed. So it's really about sustainability and about promoting those local economies in areas where it's really so desperately needed.
Can you tell me a little bit about the ideological component of consultants and technical assistance?
What we're seeing is that donors very often, when they're not convinced that a country wants to implement a certain policy, be it water privatization or free trades, freeing up markets, we'll often see them bringing in their own consultants to make sure that that country does follow that line. Tanzania is a very good example. The UK and other donors did bring in consultants to put pressure on the Tanzanian government to privatize its water system, and unfortunately that privatization was really bad news for poor people in Tanzania and eventually failed, in fact. So we know that in a number of countries across the world we're seeing these donors bringing in their consultants. They're often very highly paid, and the whole idea is to put pressure on the governments to fulfill policies that they may not otherwise want to do, and we think that that's a real problem.
All right, let's zoom out to the big picture and just talk about the core issue here. Both the Canadian and US governments are quite open about the fact that international aid should serve our foreign policy goals, that it should be an element of foreign policy for the donor country. Do you take issue with that?
I do. For me, aid, for us, for NGOs, aid is about poverty reduction. You know, there's billions, millions and billions of people across this world who simply don't have enough money to feed their families. People are dying every day because they lack essential drugs. 70 million children are outside of school. So there's a really, really big need for aid money, and that money does need to go to the people where the need is greatest. You know, aid money shouldn't really be about Canadian firms or American firms. It needs to be about getting those children in school and stopping mothers from dying in childbirth, and we think that that's a really big moral case for aid.
Romilly Greenhill, thanks for being on The Map.
Thank you.
This was the scene in Gaza today. As the news scrambles to keep track of the latest in the factional battles, we're working on bringing you the why behind the what. Tomorrow, Gaza back on The Map. When we come back, what billions of dollars in aid money will and won't buy, an exclusive documentary report from Haiti, and I press a federal minister on Canada's aid philosophy.